The sky was torn with fire. The battlefield stretched far and wide, filled with broken machines, burning metal, and the silence of those who would never rise again. Smoke curled in heavy clouds, drifting between the shattered walls of what was once a peaceful village. The war between humans and the Vulpine race had reached its cruelest point, and mercy seemed like a word no one remembered. Among the ruins, a Vulpine mother struggled to move. Her fur was matted with dust and streaks of blood. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. Each step she took sent a sharp wave of pain through her chest, but she forced herself forward. She had no thought for her own survival anymore. Her only focus was the small cub pressed tightly against her side. The cub whimpered softly, frightened by the sounds of distant gunfire and falling rubble. His large amber eyes looked up at her with trust, not understanding the danger that surrounded them. She whispered in her own language, trying to calm him. Her voice was weak, trembling, but she kept it steady for his sake. "Stay close. I will protect you." Her ears twitched at the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the broken streets. Human soldiers. They were near. The mother's heart pounded faster. She knew the stories. Humans showed no kindness to her kind. They were considered enemies, invaders, dangerous beings who destroyed everything in their path. She had seen it herself. The village burned, her kin scattered, cries swallowed by flames. Her strength failed, and she stumbled into the hollow remains of a collapsed home. She pushed her cub beneath a piece of fallen stone and then lowered herself over him. Her arms and body formed a shield, wrapping him in the only safety she could still provide. Dust fell from above as more explosions shook the ground. She closed her eyes. Her thoughts were filled with sorrow, regret, and fierce love. "At least," she whispered, "he will not face death alone. I will take the final blow for him." The footsteps grew louder. She could hear the crunch of boots on gravel, the distant shouts of orders, and the sharp click of rifles being prepared. Any moment now, she believed, a weapon would fire, and she would know the end. But it never came. Instead, she felt a shadow fall over her. A warmth touched her shoulder, not the burning heat of fire, but something firm, steady, almost gentle. She flinched and opened her eyes, expecting to see the face of her killer. It was a human. The man's face was dirty with soot, his armor scratched and dented. His rifle was slung across his back, unused. His eyes were not filled with hate, but with something she had never expected, concern. He knelt beside her, scanning the wounds across her body. For a moment his gaze met hers and she froze. She had expected coldness. Instead, she saw hesitation, worry, even a strange softness. He spoke in a language she barely understood. The words were rough to her ears, but the tone was clear. "You're hurt, stay still, I'll help." Her first instinct was to bare her teeth, to growl, to keep him away. But her cub squirmed beneath her, and the man's hand moved not toward his weapon but to lift away a heavy beam of debris that threatened to crush them. His strength surprised her. He tossed the broken stone aside, clearing space so she and the cub could breathe easier. The Vulpine mother blinked, uncertain. This was no trick? Why was he not finishing her off? Why was he removing obstacles instead of ending her life? The human carefully reached forward, and she tensed, ready to strike with what little strength she had left. But instead, he pressed something into her hand in a small pack. Inside was water. He motioned for her to drink, pointing at her cracked lips, then at the cub. She stared in disbelief. The cub, sensing no threat, reached out with tiny paws, curious. The man smiled faintly, as if relieved. He opened the container and offered it to the cub first. The mother's heart twisted. Enemy or not, he had chosen to feed her child before himself. Her body began to give way under exhaustion. She collapsed onto her side, unable to hold herself up any longer. The cub whimpered, crawling against her fur, frightened by her weakness. She whispered to him. Though her words faded, she thought this was her final moment. But instead of leaving her to die, the human soldier slid his arms beneath her and lifted her from the ground. His touch was steady, Not harsh. He carried her, as if she weighed nothing, keeping her cub nestled safely against her. She could feel the beat of his heart through the armor pressing against her side. Her thoughts swirled in confusion. Why? Why would a human, sworn enemy of her people, choose to carry her instead of ending her? Was this pity, or something else entirely? The world around her faded into blurred shapes of fire and rubble. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of his voice, low and calm, as if promising safety. She did not understand his words fully, but the tone was clear. He was not letting her go. For the first time since the war began, the Vulpine mother felt something she thought impossible. Hope. And then, she drifted into unconsciousness, shielded, not by her own body this time, but by the arms of a human she once believed was her greatest enemy. The mother awoke to the crackle of fire, but not the fire of destruction. Instead, it was the soft, controlled glow of a campfire. Her body ached, but she realized the pain was no longer as sharp as before. Something cool and soothing had been pressed against her wounds. She shifted slightly and winced, her eyes opening to scan her surroundings. She was no longer lying among ruins. The place around her looked like a hidden shelter, maybe an abandoned outpost or a broken storage room. The walls were rough, but the air was calm compared to the chaos outside. The ground beneath her had been cleared of debris, and a makeshift blanket had been placed under her. She looked down to find her cub curled against her chest, breathing softly, unharmed. Relief washed over her, and she pressed her muzzle gently to the cub's fur. Then she noticed the human. He sat near the fire, checking his supplies. His armor was set aside, leaving him in worn clothes, dirty from battle. His hands were busy cleaning strips of cloth, dipping them into a container of water, and laying them neatly on a piece of metal. He did not notice at first that she was awake. The Vulpine mother's instincts returned quickly. She shifted her weight, pulling her cub closer, her ears flattening against her head. She had survived only because of this human, but trust was not something easily given. Her people had suffered too much at human hands. The man finally turned, and when he saw her awake, his eyes softened. He lifted his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His voice was low and calm. "You're safe. Don't move too much. You're still hurt." She understood only part of his words, but the tone was clear. He did not speak like a soldier giving orders. He spoke like someone trying to comfort. The cub stirred, peeking out from her arms. The man's expression changed. He smiled faintly, reaching into a pouch and pulling out a small packet. He tore it open and revealed food. Not much, but enough. He broke it into smaller pieces and placed them carefully on a flat stone between them. Then he leaned back, making no move to force or approach. The cub tilted his head curiously. His mother gave a warning growl, but the little one ignored her, crawling toward the food with tiny steps. The human chuckled softly, the sound gentle, as if he understood the cub's stubbornness. The mother watched with sharp eyes. She expected a trick. She expected the human to snatch the cub, but nothing happened. The man stayed still, his hands resting on his knees. The cub sniffed the food, tasted it, and began to eat. Her heart trembled with confusion. Why would an enemy feed her child? Why risk his own limited supplies for them? The man finally spoke again, tapping his chest lightly. "Elias," he said. He pointed at himself. Elias. The mother frowned. She did not understand at first, but then she realized. A name. He was telling her his name. Humans named themselves too, just like Vulpine. She stayed silent, but in her mind, she repeated it. Elias. The cub, with his mouth full, turned and pressed against his mother again. She stroked his fur slowly, her eyes never leaving the human. He had shown care, but her heart still guarded itself. She needed to know why. Hours passed quietly. The sounds of war outside seemed distant here. Elias worked on her wounds. He approached carefully each time, moving slowly so she would not see him as a threat. He used strips of cloth to cover her injuries and cleaned the dirt from her fur. with water-soaked cloth. His hands were steady, his face focused. She flinched at his touch more than once, but she could not deny that his treatment lessened her pain. Each time he finished, he sat back to give her space. Never once did he show cruelty. When night deepened, the mother finally found the courage to whisper her own name. Her voice was weak, but it carried pride. Lyra. Elias looked up from the fire, surprised. Then he repeated the name carefully, as if afraid to break it. Lyra. The sound of her name in his mouth startled her. It was the first time a human had spoken it without anger or hatred. The cub chirped a soft sound, and Elias laughed quietly. He pointed at the little one. "Cub?" he asked, tilting his head. Lyra hesitated, then answered softly, "Ren." Again, Elias repeated it almost with respect. "Ren." Something changed in the air then. For the first time, the room did not feel like a cage. It felt like a strange, fragile bridge between two enemies. The next day, Lyra watched Elias more closely. He checked his weapon only once, but he never lifted it near her. Instead, he spent most of his time repairing his gear, rationing food, and watching the entrance carefully. He was protecting them. She saw it in his movements, the way his eyes scanned the shadows, the way he kept his back to the door when he slept, as if daring any danger to pass through him first. Ren began to grow bold, moving closer to Elias each time. At one point, the cub clumsily tried to climb onto his lap. Lyra tensed, ready to leap, but Elias only froze for a second, then carefully supported the cub so he would not fall. His smile returned, small and gentle, and he whispered something she could not fully understand. The mother's heart softened. Against her will, she saw no hatred in him, no hunger for violence. She saw a man who had lost much but still chose to protect. That night, as the firelight flickered, Lyra could not sleep. Her body was healing, but her mind was restless. She glanced at Elias, who sat against the wall, half dozing but still alert. Why? Why would a human risk himself for her and her cub? What did he gain? She remembered his eyes when he looked at Ren, not as an enemy child, but as something innocent, worth saving. And when he looked at her, there was no anger, only resolve. Her chest ached with conflict. She wanted to hate him. She had every reason to, but each action he took carved away at the wall she had built inside her. When dawn broke, distant sounds of battle returned, rumbling like thunder. Elias stood quickly, his hand resting on his weapon. He glanced at her, then at Ren, and his jaw tightened. He spoke one word, firm and unshaken. Safe. Lyra did not understand the full meaning, but she understood the promise in his tone. He would not let harm come to them. And for the first time since the war began, she found herself believing it. The days passed slowly inside the hidden shelter. Outside, war raged on. The sounds of distant artillery shook the earth, and flashes of fire sometimes lit the cracks in the broken ceiling. Yet within the small room, a strange calm had settled. Lyra, the Vulpine mother, still carried wounds, but Elias's steady care had begun to heal them. She could breathe without sharp pain now, and she could walk a few steps if she leaned against the wall. Ren, her cub, had grown playful again, running short circles around the fire, squeaking and tumbling with innocent joy. At first, Lyra had scolded him for getting too close to the human, but Ren did not listen. Each day, the little one crept nearer, tugging at Elias's clothing, poking at his boots, or even trying to climb onto his lap. Elias never pushed him away. Instead, he let the cub explore, smiling quietly, as if Ren's energy reminded him of something precious he had lost. Lyra watched this with confusion. Her people had taught her that humans saw them only as enemies. But this soldier, Elias, treated her cub with more care than some of her own kind had shown during the chaos of war. She could not understand it. She wanted to distrust him, but every act of patience and kindness made that wall inside her weaker. One evening, while Ren slept curled between them, Lyra finally spoke. Her voice was low, rough from both injury and caution. "Why, help us?" Elias glanced at her. The firelight flickered across his tired face. He was silent for a long time, searching for words she might understand. Finally, he tapped his chest gently. Lost." His eyes lowered, shadowed with sorrow. Then he gestured outward toward the ruins. "War. Many dead. Yours, mine." He placed a hand on his heart. "But here. Life." Lyra listened, her ears twitching as she pieced together his meaning. He had lost comrades, perhaps family. Yet he chose not to let her and her cub join the dead. She looked down at Ren's sleeping face and realized Elias's choice was not about enemies or allies. It was about protecting what little innocence still survived in a world consumed by violence. Slowly she whispered, "You strange human." Elias chuckled softly, the sound almost like a sigh. "Maybe." The silence after that was not heavy. It was lighter, like a bridge forming between them. The next day, danger returned. Lyra woke to the sound of voices outside the shelter. Human voices. Soldiers. Elias reacted instantly, his hand tightening around his weapon. His expression was calm but sharp, his eyes scanning the doorway. "Stay," he whispered firmly to Lyra. He pointed to her and Ren, then motioned downward. "Hide." Fear surged through Lyra's chest. She pulled Ren into her arms and crouched, low in the corner, her body trembling. Every instinct screamed that discovery would mean death. She pressed her muzzle against her cub's fur, trying to quiet his soft whimpers. Elias stood near the entrance, his back to them. The footsteps grew closer, and shadows crossed the cracked wall. A soldier's voice called out, harsh and commanding. Elias answered in his language, his tone steady, controlled. Lyra could not understand the words, but she understood the danger in his voice. He was lying. He was hiding them. Her heart raced as she listened to the exchange. The other soldiers moved nearer, their boots crunching on broken stone. Then silence. Elias spoke again, sharper this time, as if dismissing them. For a long, dreadful moment, Lyra thought the others would enter the shelter. But finally, their footsteps faded, drifting back into the distance. Only when the voices were gone did Elias lower his weapon and exhale. His shoulders slumped, the tension draining from him. He turned and met Lyra's wide, fearful eyes. She could not believe what he had just done. He had lied to his own people. If they had searched more closely, if they had found her and Ren, Elias would have been branded a traitor. His life would have ended alongside theirs. She whispered, her voice shaking. "Why risk?" Elias crouched before her. His gaze was firm, unflinching. "Because safe," he said simply, pointing to her and Ren. "You safe." The words struck her deeply, not just the meaning, but the conviction behind them. He had chosen her, safety over his own loyalty to his army. It was something even her own people might not have done. That night, Lyra could not sleep. She sat watching Elias as he rested with his weapon across his lap, his head tilted forward, his breathing slow, but his eyes flickered open at the slightest sound. He was exhausted, yet he refused to let his guard down. Her mind churned. He was human, the enemy. But he had become her shield. Her cub trusted him, already, climbing over him without fear. And now, after what he had done, she realized a dangerous truth. She trusted him too. She whispered to herself in her own tongue, words she never thought she would say. Perhaps. Not all enemies are the same. The following day, Elias brought water from a hidden stream nearby. When he returned, Lyra noticed his hands were scraped, his face marked with fresh scratches. He must have fought through debris and dangers to bring it back. He offered her the water first. She stared at it, then at him. Slowly, with shaking hands, she accepted. Their fingers brushed, and for a brief second she felt the warmth of his skin. It startled her, not because it was strange, but because it was gentle. Ren clapped his tiny paws happily, splashing some of the water. Elias laughed quietly, ruffling the cub's fur. The sound of his laughter lingered in the shelter, softening the hard edges of war. Lyra watched them, her chest heavy with emotions she could not name. She had once thought humans only destroyed. But here, in this broken place, one human had chosen to protect. As the sun set, Elias sat by the fire, repairing a torn strap on his gear. Lyra finally spoke again. "My people hate your kind." Her voice was quiet but steady. "We lost homes, family, everything." Elias stopped working. He looked at her with heavy eyes. He did not deny it. Instead, he placed a hand over his chest again. "Me too. Lost." His voice dropped lower. "War takes all." Their gazes met across the fire. Two enemies, yet both scarred by the same war. Ren stirred in his sleep, making soft noises. Lyra smoothed his fur gently. For the first time, she did not feel alone. The shelter did not feel like a prison anymore. It felt like something fragile, but precious. A place where two enemies had become something else. Survivors, bound by trust. And deep within her heart, though she tried to deny it, Lyra knew this bond would change everything. The fire in the shelter had burned down to soft embers. The night outside was restless, filled with the distant rumble of machines and the occasional cry of soldiers moving through the ruins. Lyra lay awake, her cub Ren curled against her chest. She listened to every sound, her ears twitching, her heart heavy. Across the room, Elias sat with his back against the wall. His weapon rested across his lap, though he did not grip it as tightly as before. His eyes were open, reflecting the faint glow of the embers. He looked like a man caught between two worlds, one of war and one of fragile peace. Lyra whispered softly, "You should sleep." Elias shook his head. "No, must watch." He tapped his ear, then pointed toward the outside. "Danger." She wanted to argue, but she could see the truth in his tired face. He had not allowed himself much rest since he found her. Every moment he carried the weight of protecting both her and her cub. It was not duty that kept him awake. It was choice. Lyra's heart twisted. Why would a human soldier choose them over his own kind? The following morning, that question returned with sharper teeth. Footsteps thundered near the shelter again. Voices, human voices, shouted orders. Elias stood quickly, signaling to Lyra to stay hidden with Ren. His jaw tightened, his eyes hard. The door to the shelter creaked open, and 3 soldiers entered. They wore the same uniform as Elias, their weapons raised, scanning the room. "Elias," one of them barked in their language. "We thought you were dead." Elias straightened, his weapon still at his side but not raised. He replied firmly, his words sharp. Lyra could not understand all of it, but she caught the tone. Defensive, controlled. He was explaining why he was here. One of the soldiers stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're hiding something," he said in a low voice. Lyra's body froze. She pressed Ren against her chest, trying to still his tiny movements. If they found her, it would mean the end. Elias stepped forward, blocking their view. He spoke quickly, his voice rising slightly. The soldiers exchanged glances, suspicion in their eyes. Then one of them moved toward the back corner where Lyra crouched. Her heart pounded. She could feel Ren trembling against her. In that moment, Elias acted. He raised his weapon, not at Lyra, but at his own comrade. His voice cut like steel. "Stop!" The soldiers froze, stunned. "Elias," one said slowly, "what are you doing?" Elias did not lower his weapon. His face was set with determination. "No harm," he said. "Not them." He pointed slightly toward Lyra's hiding place, then back at the soldiers. "They stay." Silence filled the room. The other soldiers stared at him in disbelief. "You've lost your mind," one hissed. "They're the enemy." Elias's Reply came like a strike. Enemy? Look at them. A mother. A child. Not soldiers. Not a threat. I will not let you kill them. The soldier's expressions twisted between anger and hesitation. To defy orders meant treason. To turn on their comrade meant betrayal. The air was sharp with tension, every breath heavy. Finally, one of the soldiers spat on the ground. You've chosen your side, Elias. When command learns of this, you're finished. They backed toward the doorway, their weapons lowered but their eyes burning with warning. Pray we don't see you again. With that, they left, their footsteps echoing into the ruins. Elias lowered his weapon slowly, his hands trembling. Sweat lined his forehead, but his eyes were steady. He turned toward Lyra, who had not moved, her body still coiled with fear. She whispered, You betrayed your kind? For us? Elias shook his head. Not betrayal, choice. He pressed a hand against his chest. I choose life. Lyra's breath caught. She stared at him, struggling to find words. Her people had always said humans were ruthless, bound only to orders and greed. But this man had risked everything, his honor, his safety, his life, to protect her and her cub. For the first time, she bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect from her people. Then, you are no enemy. The days that followed were tense. Elias knew his comrades would report him. It was only a matter of time before more soldiers returned, this time with orders to capture or kill him for treason. Yet he did not leave. He stayed with Lyra and Ren, preparing for the worst. He gathered what little food and water he could find. He reinforced the shelter, setting traps and warnings at the entrance. His movements were quick, efficient, but his eyes softened each time he looked at Ren playing in the corner or at Lyra as she slowly regained strength. One evening, as the fire flickered, Lyra finally spoke what had weighed on her heart. You could have left us, you could have walked away and no one would know. Why? Stay. Elias looked at her, his expression tired but sincere. Because you remind me of what matters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn picture. He handed it to her carefully. Lyra studied it. The image was faded, but she saw a woman and a child, human, smiling. Elias's eyes glistened as he whispered, My family. Gone. The truth struck her like a blade. He had lost his own, yet he chose to protect hers. She swallowed hard, emotions swirling in her chest. In that moment, she no longer saw him as an enemy. She saw him as a protector, perhaps even as kin. Ren toddled, over then climbing into Elias's lap without hesitation. The man laughed quietly, hugging the cub gently. Lyra watched, her eyes softening. She realized something both frightening and comforting. She trusted him completely, but trust did not erase danger. One night, the sound of engines roared closer. Elias's face darkened as he listened. They come, he whispered. He checked, his weapon, his movements sharp and final. Lyra's heart sank. She knew what this meant. His people had not forgiven him. They were coming to finish what they believed was betrayal. She reached for his arm, her voice shaking. You cannot fight them all. Elias met her eyes. I don't care. I will not give you up. The weight of his words pressed into her soul. He was ready to face death for them, and in that moment, Lyra made her own choice. She moved beside him, standing though her body still ached. She placed Ren in a safe corner and faced Elias firmly. Then you will not stand alone. Elias's eyes widened, but then he nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. Two enemies no longer divided by war, a human soldier and a Vulpine mother, bound not by orders, but by choice. The footsteps of soldiers drew near, their voices sharp, in the night. Elias lifted his weapon, Lyra raised her claws, and together they prepared to face whatever came. The night outside the shelter was alive with danger. The rumble of heavy boots shook the ground, and flashlights cut across the darkness like sharp blades. Voices barked orders in the human tongue, closer with each passing second. Inside, the fire had died down to embers. Elias stood near the entrance, his weapon steady in his hands, his eyes hard but calm. Beside him, Lyra crouched low, her claws flexing against the floor. Her body still ached, but her spirit was firm. She had made her choice. She would not let him face this alone. In the corner, Ren whimpered softly, sensing the storm that was about to fall. Lyra glanced back at him, her chest tightening. She whispered gently in her own language, "A promise. Stay hidden, little one. No harm will reach you." Elias noticed her trembling, but did not speak. Instead, he gave her a single nod, his gaze steady. It was not the nod of a soldier to an enemy. It was the nod of a companion, someone ready to share the same fate. The first soldiers burst in. The doorway splintered as armed men stormed through, their weapons raised. For a heartbeat, the room froze in silence. Then Elias fired, the sharp cracks echoing through the shelter. The invaders ducked and returned fire, bullets sparking against the walls. Lyra lunged, moving with sudden speed despite her wounds. Her claws slashed across one soldier's arm, sending him sprawling. Another swung his weapon toward her, but Elias stepped between them, shielding her with his own body as he fired again. The fight was desperate. Dust filled the air. Smoke burned their throats, and the roar of gunfire shook the walls. Lyra fought, with raw instinct, striking when she could, dodging when her strength allowed. Elias fought with discipline, every shot precise, his movements driven by determination rather than orders. For a moment it seemed endless, enemies pouring in, resistance breaking under sheer numbers. Then an explosion shook the shelter, collapsing, part of the ceiling. Debris rained down, dust choking the air. Lyra was thrown to the ground, pain surging through her body. She looked up in time to see a large slab of stone breaking loose above her. She could not move fast enough. She wrapped her arms around Ren, ready to shield him with her last breath. But Elias was faster. He dove forward, pushing her and the cub aside. The stone crashed down on his back, knocking him to the ground. He groaned, his body straining, but he held firm, keeping the weight from crushing them. Lyra's heart stopped. She scrambled toward him, her claws digging into the rubble, pulling pieces away with frantic strength. "No!" she cried in her own tongue, though she knew he might not understand the words. But Elias understood her fear. His eyes met hers, filled with pain yet still burning with resolve. "Safe," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You. Safe." The battle outside the shelter raged on, but inside time seemed to slow. The remaining soldiers hesitated, unwilling to risk being buried alive in the collapsing ruin. Some retreated, others shouted orders, but the fight lost its momentum. The danger outside became distant, leaving only the heavy breathing of survivors and the settling of dust. Lyra pressed her hands against the rubble, her muscles burning as she tried to free him. Elias gritted his teeth, pushing upward with what strength remained. Slowly, painfully, the slab shifted. Lyra clawed and dragged until finally, with one last heave, it toppled aside. Elias collapsed forward, his body trembling. Blood marked his skin, his breathing ragged. Yet even in his weakness he reached out, not for his weapon, not for safety, but for Ren. He pulled the cub close, cradling him gently against his chest. Lyra stared, her throat tightening. Here was a human soldier, broken and bleeding, holding her child as if it were his own. No hatred, no cruelty, only fierce protection. She crawled closer, pressing her hand against his arm. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes flickered open, meeting hers. "You. Alive," he murmured. Her chest swelled with emotion she could no longer contain. Tears streaked her fur as she leaned close, her forehead resting against his shoulder. "Because of you," she whispered. "Because you chose us." Hours later, the battlefield quieted. The soldiers who had attacked never returned, perhaps believing Elias had perished with the enemy he protected. The shelter was half collapsed, but it still held. The fire was gone, yet warmth remained in another form. Lyra stirred awake from exhaustion. She blinked slowly, realizing she was not lying on cold stone. She was in someone's embrace. Elias's, arms wrapped around her and Ren, pulling them close against his chest. His breathing was uneven, his body bruised, but his hold was steady. He had not let them go, not even in sleep. For a long moment, Lyra simply listened to the rhythm of his heart. It was strong, human, and steady, the sound of life refusing to give in. She had expected death when she shielded her cub days ago. Instead, she had found this, a warmth she never thought she would feel in the arms of an enemy. She whispered softly, almost afraid to break the silence. "Thank you." Elias's eyes opened halfway. He gave a faint smile, weary but real. "No enemy," he said. "Family." The Gi. Word struck her deeply. Family. She looked at Ren, sleeping peacefully between them, his tiny paws curled against Elias's chest. She looked back at the human, at the man who had risked everything, his duty, his comrades, his life, to protect them. In that moment, she understood. The war outside might still rage, but here, inside this broken shelter, something greater had been born. A bond stronger than orders. A trust deeper than fear. She closed her eyes, resting against him. For the first time since the war began, she felt not despair but hope. And in the human's embrace, she knew she and her cub were no longer alone.